Tommy, the Hammer Doyle and Marcus Deadeye Jenkins were the names whispered in fear across Liverpool's darkest streets. These were the enforcers, the ruthless muscle behind the city's sprawling cocaine empire, men who carried out kidnappings, beatings, and executions without hesitation. While the kingpins stayed hidden in luxury, it was Tommy, Marcus, and their violent crew who ruled the shadows, making sure the drug trade thrived through terror and bloodshed. This is the untold story of the men who kept Merseyside's criminal underworld alive and the deadly price they paid. In the shadows of Liverpool's busy docks and crowded streets, a dangerous world thrived, one most people never saw. While the city's skyline gleamed with modern life, beneath it lay a violent empire fueled by cocaine. This empire wasn't run by the men most expected. Instead, hidden from the public eye were the enforcers, the muscle, the ones who did the dirty work that kept the whole operation alive. They were the ones responsible for kidnappings, beatings, and executions, actions that kept fear alive and the business running smoothly. At the top of the cocaine network were the kingpins, wealthy and powerful men who stayed distant from the violence. They made deals, counted money, and avoided trouble by staying behind the scenes. But it was the enforcers who kept the streets under control, making sure nobody crossed the line. Their reputation was brutal and unforgiving. To outsiders, they were just criminals, but to those inside the network, they were necessary and terrifying figures. The story of Liverpool's cocaine enforcers is one of loyalty, betrayal, and survival. These men were not born criminals, but were shaped by the harsh environment of working-class neighborhoods, where opportunities were scarce and violence was common. Some fell into the life to protect their families, others out of greed or the thrill of power. Yet all of them knew that once you became an enforcer, there was no turning back. As the cocaine trade exploded in the late 1990s and early 2000s, so did the need for muscle. The streets of Merseyside became battlegrounds, with rival gangs fighting over control. Innocent people often got caught in the crossfire. The enforcers used fear as a weapon, sending clear messages to anyone who dared to challenge the kingpin's authority. This story will take you behind closed doors and into the darkest corners of Liverpool's cocaine empire. It reveals the brutal realities of the men who pulled the trigger and cracked the bones, whose actions kept one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the UK alive. What you'll learn here isn't just about drugs or money, it's about power, loyalty, and how far some will go to protect what they control. In the heart of Liverpool's rough neighborhoods, the enforcers carved out their roles through fear and violence. These men were not just hired thugs, they were the backbone of the cocaine empire, enforcing rules with ruthless efficiency. Their presence was felt in every corner where the drug trade touched, from rundown estates to hidden warehouses. To the outside world, they appeared as shadows, men who kept their faces hidden and their intentions clear. Obey or face the consequences. Most enforcers began their journey young, growing up in environments where crime was almost a way of life. Many had troubled childhoods, marked by poverty, broken homes, or time in juvenile detention. The streets of Liverpool offered little hope, and for some the drug trade became an escape route, promising quick money and a chance to belong. But joining this underworld meant accepting a brutal code, loyalty above all, and violence as the language of respect. Once recruited, enforcers were trained in more than just physical strength. They learned how to intimidate, how to gather information, and how to carry out orders without hesitation. Their tasks ranged from collecting debts and guarding shipments to more sinister acts like kidnappings and executions. Failure to follow orders often meant becoming a target themselves. In this world, trust was fragile, and betrayal was punished with deadly force. The kingpins depended heavily on their enforcers to maintain control. While the bosses planned deals and managed finances, the enforcers ensured that the business ran smoothly on the streets. Rival gangs and informants knew better than to cross these men. News of brutal beatings or disappearances spread quickly, creating a chilling atmosphere that kept most people silent. However, the enforcers' power also made them vulnerable. They lived on the edge, always under threat from the police, from rival groups, and sometimes from within their own ranks. Paranoia was common, and alliances shifted like quicksand. The very violence that gave them control also planted the seeds for eventual downfall. This chapter uncovers the dark lives of these men, how they became the violent force behind Liverpool's cocaine empire, and why their stories often end in tragedy. It's a world where strength is both a weapon and a curse. The rise of Liverpool's cocaine empire was fueled not just by drugs, but by fear, a fear carefully cultivated and maintained by the enforcers. These men were more than muscle, they were the architects of intimidation. Their reputation alone was often enough to silence opposition and keep the kingpins' orders unchallenged. The enforcers operated in a way that was methodical and brutal, sending messages that could not be ignored. One of their most common tactics was the use of kidnappings. When debts weren't paid or rules were broken, victims would disappear. Families were left with no answers, only rumors and fear. These kidnappings served multiple purposes. They punished those who crossed the line, and they acted as warnings to others who might consider defying the empire. Some captives were released after brutal beatings, their bodies marked as a grim reminder of the enforcers' reach. Others were never seen again, disappearing into a deadly void where silence was the only response. Beatings were another tool used to maintain control. Public and private, these acts of violence were designed to humiliate as much as to hurt. Enforcers often targeted not just the guilty but their families as well, showing that no one was safe from the consequences of crossing the cocaine empire. This ruthless approach ensured loyalty, as fear replaced trust, and cooperation was bought with the threat of pain. Executions were the darkest and most final method the enforcers employed. When the kingpins suspected betrayal, or when rival gangs challenged their power, the enforcers dealt swift and merciless justice. These killings were rarely random acts of rage. They were calculated strikes meant to eliminate threats and reinforce the empire's dominance. Bodies were left as warnings, sometimes displayed in shocking ways to send a message across the city. But while the enforcers' violence helped secure the empire's power, it also sowed distrust within their own ranks. The constant pressure to prove loyalty led some to betray others, creating a web of suspicion. This tension would later play a crucial role in the unraveling of Liverpool's cocaine empire, showing that even the fiercest enforcers were not immune to fear and betrayal. As the cocaine empire grew, so did the complexity of the enforcers' roles. No longer were they just street fighters or debt collectors. They became skilled operatives who managed logistics, intelligence, and internal discipline. The kingpins relied on them to keep every part of the operation running smoothly, from protecting shipments to rooting out informants. Their work demanded a cold, calculating mindset alongside brutal strength. Behind the scenes, enforcers built networks of spies and lookouts. They monitored police movements, rival gangs, and even their own members. This constant surveillance was essential to avoiding raids and protecting valuable shipments of cocaine arriving by sea or air. The enforcers used coded messages, secret signals, and trusted contacts to communicate across the city without drawing attention. Their ability to stay one step ahead was critical to the empire's survival. Internal discipline was another key responsibility. Enforcers acted as judges and executioners within their own ranks. When someone broke the rules, whether by stealing from the bosses, skimming profits, or talking to the police, they faced severe punishment. These punishments were designed to be examples to others, ensuring fear and obedience remained strong. Loyalty was demanded above all else, and those who wavered often found themselves victims of the same violent methods they once enforced. The enforcers also played a role in recruitment, identifying young men who showed promise for the violent lifestyle. These recruits were tested and trained, taught how to fight, intimidate, and carry out orders without question. For many, joining the enforcers meant a quick rise in status and wealth, but it also meant signing up for a life filled with danger and violence. Few ever left once they entered. As the empire expanded, tensions within grew as well. Competition between enforcers for power and influence became fierce. Some sought to rise by betraying others, while others struggled to maintain control in an increasingly volatile environment. This internal conflict would later contribute to the empire's downfall, proving that in a world ruled by violence, trust was a rare and fragile commodity. The enforcers were powerful, but they were also trapped in a dangerous game where one wrong move could mean death. The cocaine empire's grip on Liverpool tightened through a network of secret deals and violent enforcement. But it was the enforcers who often faced the most dangerous moments. One of their most feared tasks was protecting drug shipments. These shipments arrived in hidden containers at the docks or in unmarked vehicles moving through the city's streets. The kingpins depended on the enforcers to guard these loads against police raids, rival gangs, or thieves. Protection was a high-stakes game. Any slip-up could cost millions and invite deadly consequences. It reveals the constant threat of violence, the pressure to perform flawlessly, and the heavy price paid by those who failed. In Liverpool's cocaine trade, protection was not just a job, it was a deadly responsibility. The enforcers' influence extended far beyond violent acts. They were deeply embedded in Liverpool's communities, controlling everyday life in neighborhoods tied to the cocaine trade. Their power was not only through fear, but also through a twisted form of order. In areas where law enforcement was stretched thin, the enforcers became the unofficial rulers, deciding who could live where, who could sell what, and who was allowed to speak out. Their presence was felt in local shops, bars, and even schools. Enforcers made sure their rules were followed, often forcing businesses to pay protection money to avoid attacks or vandalism. Those who resisted faced intimidation or worse. This control extended into the lives of ordinary people, many of whom lived in constant fear, caught between the threat of violence and the desperation of poverty. Behind this power was a network of informants and spies, residents who willingly, or under duress, fed information back to the enforcers. This created an atmosphere of suspicion and silence. People learned quickly not to trust their neighbors, knowing that a single word could lead to brutal consequences. The enforcers' ability to gather intelligence gave them an edge over police and rival gangs alike. Yet, despite their fearsome reputation, some enforcers tried to maintain a code of conduct within their own circles. Excessive violence against innocent civilians was sometimes discouraged, seen as bad for business. They understood that alienating the community could bring unwanted attention from the police, or spark rebellion. This uneasy balance allowed the empire to thrive for years, feeding off both fear and reluctant acceptance. However, this control was fragile. As police efforts intensified and rival gangs became more aggressive, cracks began to appear. The enforcers faced growing pressure from all sides, law enforcement closing in, communities starting to resist, and internal tensions rising. This chapter reveals how the enforcers ruled the streets, not just with fists, but with an iron grip over everyday life, shaping Liverpool's neighborhoods through fear and control, until the weight of their own violence began to crumble their empire from within. As the cocaine empire expanded, so did the risks faced by the enforcers. They lived constantly on edge, aware that one mistake could lead to capture, betrayal, or death. The increasing pressure from law enforcement was relentless. Police had begun to focus on dismantling the drug networks, using undercover officers, surveillance, and informants to gather evidence. For the enforcers, this meant adapting quickly or facing arrest and imprisonment. Some enforcers tried to avoid detection by changing their routines, using safe houses, or relying on encrypted communication. Yet the constant threat of being watched or followed created paranoia. Trust became even harder to come by within their ranks. As the fear of betrayal grew, the empire's success depended on secrecy, but the more violent and expansive it became, the harder it was to hide. Rival gangs also saw opportunities in this tension. They exploited weaknesses, setting traps or bribing insiders to gain information. Violent turf wars broke out more frequently, turning Liverpool streets into battlegrounds. Enforcers found themselves caught, not just between the police and their own bosses, but also in deadly conflicts with their enemies. Many lost their lives in these clashes, some disappearing without a trace. The constant danger pushed some enforcers to make desperate decisions. A few chose to cooperate with police, hoping to reduce their sentences or protect themselves. This betrayal was seen as the ultimate crime within the empire, often leading to violent retribution against the traitor's family or associates. The fear of informants kept everyone on edge, fueling suspicion and further violence. Despite the risks, the cocaine trade remained hugely profitable, and the enforcers' loyalty to the empire was difficult to break. The promise of wealth, power, and status kept many tied to a life they knew was dangerous, but couldn't leave. This chapter explores the precarious existence of Liverpool's enforcers, men walking a tightrope between power and destruction, trapped in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Their story is one of fear, risk, and the desperate choices made when the walls close in. As the empire's grip tightened, cracks began to appear, not only from outside pressure but from within. Rivalries and jealousy among the enforcers grew, fueled by ambition and paranoia. The violent world they operated in bred distrust, and friendships could turn into deadly betrayals overnight. Power struggles erupted as some enforcers sought more control, hoping to climb the dangerous ladder toward the kingpins. Betrayal became a dark theme running through the empire. Some enforcers, fearing arrest or death, chose to cooperate with law enforcement, providing crucial information in exchange for protection or reduced sentences. These betrayals shattered the fragile trust that held the network together. In retaliation, the remaining enforcers carried out brutal executions of suspected informants, sending chilling messages to others who might consider turning. These internal conflicts weakened the empire's foundation. As trust eroded, communication broke down, shipments were lost, and rival gangs seized the opportunity to challenge the once unshakable control. The kingpins, often isolated from the street-level violence, struggled to maintain order as their enforcers fought among themselves. The police investigations also capitalized on these fractures. Using informants within the enforcers' ranks, law enforcement built cases that exposed the network's darkest secrets. Surveillance operations uncovered meetings, weapons caches, and drug shipments, leading to arrests that rocked the empire. These arrests fueled further paranoia, as those still free feared their own comrades might be next to betray them. Despite the chaos, some enforcers held tightly to their code of loyalty, unwilling to abandon the only life they knew. But the increasing violence and suspicion made it clear the empire was unraveling. The once feared enforcers found themselves hunted not only by the law but by their own former allies. This chapter reveals how ambition and fear turned brother against brother, triggering a collapse from within. It shows that even the most brutal enforcers could not escape the consequences of betrayal and greed. The violent world they helped build began to implode, setting the stage for the empire's dramatic fall. The fall of Liverpool's cocaine empire was marked by a series of shocking events that exposed the deadly cost of a life built on violence and fear. As law enforcement closed in, major arrests sent ripples through the criminal network. Key kingpins were captured, but it was the enforcers, the ruthless muscle behind the scenes, who faced some of the harshest consequences. Many were arrested during coordinated raids, caught in carefully planned police operations that had been months, sometimes years in the making. These arrests didn't happen overnight. Undercover officers had infiltrated the network, gathering critical evidence and building trust with informants. The turning point came when several enforcers, worn down by fear and betrayal, chose to cooperate with police. Their testimonies provided a window into the empire's inner workings, detailing kidnappings, beatings, and executions that had long remained hidden. This led to high-profile trials that shocked Liverpool and revealed the extent of the cocaine trade's violent underbelly. The public reaction was a mixture of relief and horror. For years, many had lived in fear or denial about the violent crimes happening in their neighborhoods. The exposure of the enforcers' brutality forced the city to confront a harsh reality. Families of victims finally found some answers, though justice could never undo the pain and loss. But the empire's collapse didn't end with arrests. It sparked a violent power vacuum. Rival gangs and surviving enforcers scrambled to claim territory, leading to more bloody clashes. The streets of Liverpool remained dangerous, proving that the cycle of violence was hard to break. However, the dismantling of the cocaine network dealt a serious blow to the criminal infrastructure, weakening the grip of organized crime. This chapter uncovers the dramatic downfall of Liverpool's cocaine empire, the arrests, the trials, and the aftermath. It reveals the heavy price paid by the enforcers, caught between loyalty and survival. The empire that once ruled with fear began to crumble, but its violent legacy would haunt the city for years to come. The story of Liverpool's cocaine enforcers doesn't end with arrests and trials. Even after the empire's collapse, the impact of their violence and fear lingers, shaping the city in subtle but powerful ways. The enforcers left behind scars, both physical and emotional, on communities, families, and individuals caught in the crossfire. Their brutal methods created a culture of silence and distrust that took years to begin healing. Many former enforcers faced long prison sentences, but some tried to rebuild their lives after release. A few sought redemption, working to leave behind the violence, while others struggled with the weight of their past actions. The trauma experienced by those who lived under their rule did not simply disappear. It echoed in neighborhoods still grappling with poverty and crime. The collapse of the cocaine empire created a vacuum, but it also served as a warning. Law enforcement agencies learned valuable lessons about the importance of intelligence gathering, undercover work, and community cooperation. Over time, police partnerships with local residents grew stronger, helping to prevent new criminal networks from taking root. Yet the threat of organized crime remains, constantly evolving in response to these efforts. The legacy of the enforcers is also a story about choices, how individuals trapped by environment and circumstance made decisions that shaped their lives and those around them. Their rise and fall highlight the dangerous allure of power and money, but also the devastating consequences when violence becomes a way of life. For every brutal act carried out in the name of the empire, there was a ripple effect, touching lives far beyond the street. This final chapter reflects on the long-lasting impact of Liverpool's cocaine enforcers, showing that while the empire may have fallen, the lessons remain. It's a cautionary tale about the cost of crime, the fragility of loyalty built on fear, and the resilience of communities fighting to reclaim their streets. The story lifts the veil on a violent world, reminding us that behind the headlines are real people, lives forever changed by the shadow